In the late 19th century, thousands of Japanese immigrants from a feudal island arrived on these shores to help clear the forest, harvest the seas, and develop the wealth of a young country. What they met was white hostility. In 1895, British Columbia denied Asian people and First Nations people the rights of citizenship. In 1900, Tommy Hama challenged this law. He won in the BC courts, but the province appealed to England's Privy Council and succeeded, preserving its power to deny their vote to Asians and First Nations. Decades of tension and fear of the Yellow Peril erupted when angry whites mobbed Vancouver's Japantown area. Despite the racism, Japanese Canadians continued to thrive in fishing, logging, mining, and farming. They established businesses and raised families. Canada declared war on Japan after the December 7, 1941 bombing of Pearl Harbor. The War Measures Act was invoked and applied to those of Japanese ancestry, as it had been against German and Italian Canadians in 1939. However, by comparison, German and Italian Canadians were largely unaffected. Those with Japanese ancestry were branded as enemy aliens, ordered to carry ID cards, be fingerprinted, and registered. BC wanted more. All levels of BC governments conspired to expel Japanese Canadians and expropriate their property from the protected area 100 miles inland from the coast. Now is the time to address British Columbia's responsibility and leadership role in ethnic cleansing, property dispossession, and community destruction. Some powerful forces spoke against the removal. The Army's Lieutenant Governor Ken Stewart reported, "I cannot see that they constitute the slightest menace to national security." RCMP Assistant Commissioner Frederick Meade agreed, "No fear of sabotage need be expected from the Japanese in Canada." The Prime Minister's Executive Assistant, Jack Pickersgill, confirmed, "I don't think that there was a member of cabinet who honestly believed that the Japanese were dangerous. It was a British Columbia problem." Initially, Ottawa resisted taking more extreme measures. Despite no evidence of a security risk, BC politicians began a concerted campaign to cleanse the province of Japanese Canadians. In January 1942, Premier John Hart appointed Cabinet Minister George Pearson to lead a BC delegation to Ottawa, where they joined forces with Federal Cabinet Minister Ian McKenzie to demand the uprooting of all, including women and children. Responsible politicians were BC Federal MP Robert Mayhew, along with Ministers Royal Maitland and Harry Perry, CCF leader Harold Winch, and MLA Alan Neal. MP McKenzie went on public record stating, "It is the government's plan to get these people out of BC as fast as possible. It is my personal intention, as long as I remain in public life, to see they never come back here." In the end, Ottawa conceded to BC's demands. on February 24, 1942, by ordering all persons of the Japanese race are to leave the protected area. The order was executed quickly. The BC Security Commission, a federal agency, directed the uprooting, dispersal, and incarceration. It involved BC Representative John Shiras and MLAs Maitland, Pearson, and Winch. The camps were often erroneously referred to as internment camps. The Geneva Conventions state a country cannot intern its own nationals, only enemy foreigners. BC refused to pay for children's education, the provincial obligation. The camps relied largely on religious groups and their own resources. More than 2,600 men in 24 labor camps along the Trans-Canada built roads in the interior. The last camp closed in March 1946. To hasten the removal of families from the province, the BC Security Commission advertised these laborers as both industrious and loyal. Resistors to the breakup of families were sent to a POW camp in Ontario. In 1943, George Collins, chair of BC Security Commission, ordered, "These people will be dispersed across Canada in small groups and exiled from BC." In contrast, Japanese Americans were allowed to return to their homes and businesses before the end of the war. However, in 1945, Canada, at the urging of BC politicians, forced all Japanese Canadians to choose between moving east of the Rockies or being shipped to Japan. In the end, 13,000 people were sent east and 4,000 were exiled to Japan. The BC government and the City of Vancouver colluded with the custodian of enemy property in the dispossession. Vancouver City Council wanted to redevelop the Powell Street area. The city urged Glenn McPherson, the custodian's Vancouver representative, to sell all Japanese Canadian homes and businesses in that area. McPherson collaborated with the BC's Municipal Affairs Minister, Edward Bridgman, to obtain municipal property assessment records. Then, McPherson met with Vancouver officials to discuss their interest in acquiring properties. In January 1943, despite Ottawa's initial reluctance, Cabinet bowed to BC pressure and granted the custodian of enemy property the right to dispose of everything without Japanese Canadians' consent. BC judges Sidney Smith and David Whiteside approved each forced sale. The proceeds from the sales paid for the incarceration, contrary to the Geneva Conventions. In the US, there was no seizure or sale of property. Gone was Vancouver's Japantown, the geographical heart of the community, where the pulse was felt, where more than 8,000 people lived, worked, and played. 59 language schools in the province were closed. Education was disrupted. Vibrant business communities were wiped out. Future generations lost touch with their heritage, resulting in the loss of language and culture. Prime Minister Mackenzie King declared in 1944, "It is a fact that no person of the Japanese race born in Canada has been charged with any act of sabotage or disloyalty during the years of the war." But post-war BC continued its racist policies. BC reaffirmed the denial of the vote to Japanese Canadians and First Nations in March 1947. In 1948, BC's Premier Brian Johnson prevented Japanese Canadians from returning to the coast. BC agreed to pay half of the cost of their continued exile. In the same year, the province reimposed a 1902 ban that prevented Japanese Canadians from working as loggers on Crown lands. Slowly, the tide changed, and in April 1949, Japanese Canadians won their rights of citizenship through a national political campaign. Almost 40 years later, honor was restored with the signing of the Redress settlement with the federal government. The terms included $21,000 to each survivor, $12 million to a community fund, and $24 million for a race relations foundation.